It started with a late-night phone call. You know the kind that jolts you awake, your heart racing before you even pick up. My wife, Emma, was sound asleep beside me, her arm draped lazily across my chest. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the sound, but then it came again, 3 short, insistent rings. I groggily reached for my phone, but the screen was dark. It wasn't mine. My eyes shifted to Emma's side of the bed. There it was, glowing faintly on the nightstand. Her phone buzzed one more time, rattling against the wood like it was trying to escape. She didn't move. Emma could sleep through a hurricane. I leaned over to check the screen, out of sheer curiosity more than anything else. I wasn't the suspicious type, not until that moment. The caller ID was blocked, just the word private staring back at me, as if daring me to answer. I hesitated. I didn't want to snoop. I didn't want to go down that road. But then I heard something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, a muffled voice. It wasn't coming from her phone. It was coming from outside. Sliding out of bed as quietly as I could, I crept to the window. There, at the far end of the driveway, I saw a man. He was pacing, phone to his ear, illuminated by the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. I froze, torn between slamming the window shut and yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" My pulse hammered in my ears as I watched him gesture wildly, like he was arguing with someone. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty street. When I finally turned back to the room, Emma was sitting up in bed, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She shook her head, too quickly. "What are you talking about?" "That guy. At the end of the driveway. He was on his phone." "Was he calling you?" Her expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. She started to say something, then stopped, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Emma?" I pressed. "Who was he?" "I don't know," she mumbled, pulling the blankets around her like armor. "You probably just imagined it." I didn't imagine anything. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The following day, I couldn't let it go. Emma acted like nothing had happened, but the image of that man standing at the end of our driveway burned in my mind. If I confronted her again, she'd only dismiss it, maybe even turn it around on me. No, I needed something concrete. I worked from home, which made things easier in some ways and harder in others. I had time to observe, to notice the patterns that seemed so ordinary before but now felt deliberate. But I also had to keep my cool, not let my suspicions leak into our day-to-day interactions. Emma was a creature of habit. She left for work every morning at exactly 8:15, coffee in one hand, a reusable tote bag in the other. She'd kiss me on the cheek, say "see you tonight," and walk out the door. On this particular morning, though, I noticed something different. Her tote bag, normally filled with her laptop and a folder or two, was unusually packed. It bulged at the sides, as if she'd crammed half her office into it. "You've got a lot of stuff today," I said casually, sipping my coffee. She glanced at the bag, her smile tight. "Yeah, a project meeting. It's a big one." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. "Need help carrying it to the car?" I offered, standing up. "No, I've got it," she said, practically bolting out the door. That was the first crack. The moment I realized I wasn't paranoid, there was something going on. I waited 10 minutes after she left before grabbing my car keys. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything crazy. I just wanted to see where she went. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe this was all in my head. I parked a block away from her office building and waited. Her car was in its usual spot, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. But then, at 8:47, she walked out of the building. She wasn't carrying her tote bag. Instead of heading to another meeting, Emma got into a black sedan parked on the side of the street. It wasn't her car, and it wasn't an Uber. The driver stepped out, and my stomach clenched. It was the same man from last night, the one pacing at the end of our driveway. They didn't speak as she slid into the passenger seat. He got back in, and the car pulled into traffic. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding. They didn't go far, just a few blocks, but the destination wasn't what I expected. It was a hotel. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They walked in together, side by side, their movements easy and familiar. He didn't touch her, but he didn't need to. The way she tilted her head toward him, the way she smiled, it said enough. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Neither of them came out. The rational part of me wanted to leave. To go home and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But the other part, the part that needed answers, refused to budge. I got out of the car and crossed the street, walking into the hotel lobby. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to act natural. The receptionist glanced up as I approached the desk. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for my wife," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's meeting someone here, but I think I might be at the wrong hotel." The receptionist gave me a skeptical look. "What's her name?" I hesitated. If I gave Emma's real name and she checked the system, this could blow up in my face. "Actually, never mind," I said quickly. "Thanks anyway." I turned to leave, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of the elevator panel on the far wall. The light for the 5th floor was illuminated. I took the stairs, partly because I didn't want to be seen in the elevator and partly because I needed to burn off the adrenaline coursing through me. When I reached the 5th floor, I stopped at the landing and listened. The hallway was quiet, but one door stood ajar, just a crack. I moved closer, my footsteps as soft as I could make them. Inside, I heard voices, Emma's and his. "You know this is risky," she was saying, her tone low but firm. "It's fine," the man replied. "No one's going to find out." I stepped back, my pulse hammering in my ears. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned and left, my mind racing. By the time I got back to my car, I was shaking. This was more than I'd prepared for. Back at home, I tried to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And why was Emma willing to risk everything we'd built together? I spent the rest of the day digging. If she thought she could keep this from me, she was wrong. I started with the basics, her emails, her social media accounts. It didn't take long to find him. His name was Greg Larson, a regional manager for a company her firm partnered with. The pieces started falling into place. The late-night phone calls. The project meetings. The sudden changes in her schedule. By the time Emma came home that evening, I had enough evidence to confront her. But I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed to know everything. So I waited. I played the role of the oblivious husband, smiling and nodding through dinner while the storm brewed just beneath the surface. If she thought she was going to get away with this, she was sorely mistaken. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a fresh cup of coffee in hand. Emma bustled around, getting ready for work. Her demeanor was as it always was, cheerful, composed, and entirely unaware of the storm brewing in my head. I'd spent half the night preparing, going through the evidence again and again. The messages, the calls, the hotel, every detail was burned into my brain. If I was going to confront her, I needed to control the situation. No theatrics, no yelling. Just cold, hard facts. "Morning," she said, brushing past me to grab a yogurt from the fridge. "Morning," I replied, my tone even. She didn't notice anything off. She never did. "You have any plans today?" she asked casually. "A few," I said, not elaborating. She nodded, already distracted. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at the screen before silencing it. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. "Running late?" I asked, feigning indifference. "Yeah, a little," she said. "Big meeting this morning. I'll see you tonight, okay?" "Actually," I said, stopping her in her tracks, "I think we should talk." Her hand froze on the yogurt lid. "Talk?" About what? About your meeting yesterday. She blinked, her expression tightening ever so slightly. What meeting? At the hotel, I said, keeping my voice steady. Her face paled. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. Sit down, Emma, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. She hesitated but did as I asked, her movements stiff and guarded. I followed you yesterday, I said bluntly. I saw you meet him. I saw you go into that hotel together. Her eyes widened, and she looked like she might argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't lie to me, I said. I've seen enough to know exactly what's going on. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. It's not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. Really? I said, leaning back in my chair. Because it looked pretty clear to me. It's complicated, she said, avoiding my gaze. Then explain it to me, I said. Make me understand why my wife is sneaking around with another man. She flinched, her hands twisting in her lap. It's not. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for what to happen? I pressed. Her lips trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't plan this, Alex. It just happened. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay calm. How long? She hesitated, then mumbled, a few months. A few months, I repeated, my voice cold. So while I was here, thinking everything was fine, you were off screwing some guy behind my back? It's not like that, she said, her voice rising. Then tell me what it is like, Emma. I snapped, finally losing my patience. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I was lonely, Alex. You're always so busy with work, and we barely talk anymore. I didn't know how to fix it. So you decided to cheat instead? I said, my voice dripping with disdain. Great solution. It wasn't supposed to be serious, she said, her voice cracking. It was just, I don't know, a distraction. A distraction, I said, the words bitter in my mouth. You destroyed our marriage for a distraction? I didn't destroy anything, she shouted, standing up. You did. You're the one who's been distant, who stopped caring. Don't you dare put this on me, I said, standing as well. I didn't cheat, Emma. I didn't throw away everything we built together. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I stared at her, my chest heaving. I wanted to believe her, to think this was just a terrible mistake. But the anger and betrayal burned too hot. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice low. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice muffled by her hands. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my emotions. I want the truth. All of it. No more lies, no more half-truths. You tell me everything, right now. For the next hour, she talked. She told me about how she'd met Greg at a work event, how they'd started talking, and how it had escalated from there. She claimed it had only been physical a few times, but I didn't believe her. The details didn't matter. The damage was done. When she was finished, we sat in silence. The weight of her confession hung heavy in the air. I don't know what to say, she said finally, her voice hoarse. There's nothing to say, I replied. You made your choice, Emma. Now I have to make mine. I got up and left the room, leaving her to sit there with her guilt and shame. Upstairs, I locked the door and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was the end of everything I thought we had. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. By the time I came back downstairs, the house was quiet. Emma was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. The screen was on, but the volume was muted, and she wasn't really watching. She was frozen in place, her hands gripping a throw pillow like it might somehow save her from drowning in the silence. I ignored her and went straight to my office. The door clicked shut behind me, and I locked it. I had work to do. Revenge isn't about anger, it's about precision. If I was going to do this, I had to get it right. No screaming matches or throwing dishes. No dramatic declarations in front of the kids. Just cold, calculated consequences. The first step was making sure I had everything I needed. Over the past few months, I'd unwittingly accumulated plenty of evidence, photos of her late-night arrivals, receipts from hotels and restaurants I'd never been to, and a growing file of details about Greg Larson. Now that she'd confirmed it all, those pieces of evidence became weapons. I started with her phone. After Emma had gone to bed, I retrieved it from her purse. She rarely set a password, and tonight was no different. I wasn't snooping for more proof, I already had enough. I was looking for connections. Contacts. Patterns. Greg's number was saved under a generic name, Mike Work. A quick scroll through their messages told me everything I needed to know. They weren't shy about their affair, dates, times, and even photos were all there. It was almost insulting how sloppy they'd been. I copied everything to my laptop, making sure to keep the metadata intact. It wasn't just about catching her, it was about protecting myself. If this turned into a legal battle, I wanted to make sure I had every angle covered. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. I didn't tell Emma, of course. She still thought we were in the middle of a tense figuring things out phase. I let her think that, because it kept her off guard. The lawyer was a shark. Her reputation preceded her, and she didn't disappoint. She walked me through the process of protecting my assets, securing custody of the kids, and ensuring Emma didn't get a dime more than she deserved. "Do you have proof of the affair?" the lawyer asked. "I have everything," I replied. "Good," she said. "We'll use that to negotiate. Judges don't like cheaters." The plan was set. All I had to do was wait. Waiting wasn't easy. Every day, I had to sit across from Emma at the dinner table, pretending everything was normal. I had to watch her interact with the kids, smiling and laughing like she hadn't burned our life to the ground. It was infuriating, but I kept my cool. I wasn't just waiting for the legal process to play out. I was setting the stage for something bigger. Emma wasn't just going to lose me, she was going to lose everything she'd taken for granted. Step 1 was Greg. I didn't just want to end the affair, I wanted to ruin it. Using the details from their messages, I pieced together his schedule, his habits, and his vulnerabilities. He wasn't as untouchable as he probably thought he was. One morning, while Emma was at work, I drove to Greg's office. It was a nondescript building in a business park, the kind of place where people in suits shuffled paper and sent emails all day. I waited in the parking lot until I saw him come out for lunch. He was exactly as I'd imagined, mid-40s, smug, and oblivious to the consequences of his actions. He didn't notice me following him to the cafe down the street, or when I took a seat 2 tables away. I didn't approach him directly. That would come later. For now, I just wanted to see him in person, to get a feel for the man who thought he could step into my life and take what was mine. Back at home, I dug deeper. It didn't take long to find the weak spot. Greg was married. His wife, Karen, was a teacher at a local elementary school. They had 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, and a dog named Max. Perfect. I drafted an email to Karen. I didn't include all the sordid details, just enough to make it clear what was happening. I attached a few photos for good measure and hit send. Within hours, I got a reply. "Who is this?" Karen had written. "Why are you sending me this?" I didn't reply. The photos spoke for themselves. The next day, I followed up with Greg. This time, I waited until he left work, catching him in the parking lot as he headed to his car. "Greg Larson," I said, stepping in front of him. He looked at me, confused. "Do I know you?" "You do now," I said. "I'm Alex. Emma's husband." His face went pale. He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. "Your wife knows," I said. "I made sure of it." "What the hell," he started, but I cut him off. "This is your one warning," I said. Stay away from my family, or I'll make sure everyone in your life knows exactly who you are. Your boss, your friends, your kids' teachers. Everyone. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, leaving him to process the consequences of his actions. At home, I could see the cracks starting to form. Emma was on edge, checking her phone constantly and pacing around the house like a caged animal. She didn't say anything, but I knew she was feeling the fallout. That evening, I sat her down again. "It's over," I said. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I mean us. This marriage. Everything. I've spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon." She burst into tears, begging and pleading, but I didn't falter. The time for apologies was long past. Emma thought she could cheat and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. By the time I was finished, she wouldn't just lose me, she'd lose the life she'd taken for granted. And Greg? He'd regret ever stepping into my world. This was just the beginning. Emma and I had avoided any meaningful interaction for days after I informed her about the impending divorce. I was civil for the kids, but every word between us was brief, transactional. This wasn't a life anymore, it was a ceasefire. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat in the living room waiting for her to come home from her late shift. This time, I wasn't going to leave things unresolved. It was time for the final conversation. When the sound of her key in the front door echoed through the house, I straightened in my seat. Emma stepped inside, her shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The weight of everything was written all over her face. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tentative as she set her bag on the entryway bench. "Emma," I replied, motioning to the armchair across from me. "Sit down. We need to talk." She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face for clues about what was coming. Then she nodded and sat down, her hands gripping the edges of the chair like she was bracing for impact. "I can't live like this anymore," I said, starting bluntly. "I've spent weeks trying to process everything, what you did, how you lied, and how you made me feel like I was losing my mind when I sensed something was off. And now, I need clarity. Real clarity." She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't interrupt. Just let me finish." She leaned back, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "I've been thinking about this non-stop, Emma," I continued. "Every hour of every day, I'd been stuck in this loop, wondering why. Wondering what I did wrong to make you think it was okay to betray me. And after everything you've told me about feeling lonely, disconnected, ignored, I still don't get it." "Alex," she said softly, her voice trembling, I said let me finish," I interrupted, my tone sharp. She flinched but didn't say anything else. "I've come to realize something," I said, taking a deep breath. "This wasn't about me. It wasn't about anything I did or didn't do. This was about you, Emma. Your choices. Your selfishness. You decided that your temporary needs were more important than the life we built together. And I need to understand one thing before I move forward. Do you regret it? Not just getting caught, but what you did to me. To us. To the kids. Do you actually regret it?" The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "I regret everything. I regret hurting you. I regret betraying you. I regret losing your trust. I didn't know how to fix things, Alex. I felt like I was drowning, and I didn't know how to ask for help." I stared at her, searching for any sign of sincerity. Her tears looked real, her voice sounded genuine, but I couldn't trust my instincts anymore. "I don't know if I believe you," I said finally. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't know if you regret what you did or if you just regret the consequences." "There's a big difference, Emma." She shook her head, sobbing openly now. "I do regret it. All of it. I wish I could take it back." "Well, you can't," I said coldly. You made your choice. And now, I'm making mine. She looked at me, desperation etched into every line of her face. Alex, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can rebuild. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late, I said firmly. There's no going back from this. Even if I wanted to forgive you, and I could never forget what you did. Every time I look at you, I'd see him. I'd see the lies. I'd see the betrayal. And that's no way to live. She buried her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. She didn't deserve my pity. What happens now? She asked after a long silence, her voice barely audible. Now, we finalize the divorce, I said. I'll stay in the house with the kids until we figure out the logistics. You can move into the guest room in the meantime. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and despair. You want me to leave the bedroom? Yes, I said without hesitation. You lost the right to share that space with me the moment you decided to cheat. You're lucky I'm not asking you to move out altogether yet. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, her defeat palpable. What about the kids? She asked, her voice cracking. What do we tell them? We'll tell them the truth when the time is right. For now, we keep things as normal as possible. But I won't lie to them, Emma. When they ask why we're getting divorced, I'll tell them the truth. That's on you. She winced, the weight of my words hitting her like a blow. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice breaking. I'm sure you are, I said, standing up. But sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. I left the room without another word, closing the door behind me. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I felt empty, drained, like I'd given everything I had to that conversation and was left with nothing in return. This was the end. Not just of our marriage, but of the life I thought I had. And as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right decision. There was no going back now. The days after our conversation were a blur of tense silences and practical arrangements. Emma moved into the guest room that evening without protest, taking only what she needed and leaving the rest of her belongings untouched. It was surreal, the woman I had once loved more than anything reduced to a stranger shuffling through the house. I stayed focused on the kids. Olivia and Ben were perceptive, though I hadn't yet told them the full story. They could sense the tension, the quiet hostility that hung in the air like a third person living among us. They asked questions. Why isn't Mom sleeping in your room? Are you and Mom mad at each other? And I deflected with vague answers. It's grown-up stuff, I said when Olivia pressed. We're just working through some things. She frowned, clearly unconvinced, but nodded. Ben, on the other hand, didn't seem to want answers. He kept his distance, retreating to his room or his video games whenever the atmosphere grew too heavy. While Emma seemed content to wallow in guilt, I was busy tying up loose ends. My lawyer and I worked efficiently, drawing up the necessary papers and making sure my assets were protected. I couldn't let her betrayal jeopardize my financial future or the kids' stability. I had also reached out to Greg's wife, Karen, once more. Not for revenge, at least, not entirely, but because I believed she deserved to know the full truth. She had replied with a curt acknowledgement, thanking me for the information. From what I could gather, she was pursuing her own legal action against Greg. Good. He deserved it. But the revenge, the legal battles, and the logistics weren't what consumed me the most. What haunted me was the quiet in-between moments, sitting at the kitchen table where we used to laugh over breakfast, passing by the couch where we used to sit close during movie nights, the empty side of the bed that had once been hers. I was angry, furious, even, but beneath the rage was a deeper, more painful truth. I missed her. Not the Emma who lied and cheated, but the Emma I thought I knew. The Emma who held my hand during the kids' births, who stayed up late with me talking about dreams and plans, who had once been my best friend. And that was the hardest part. Knowing that the person I missed didn't exist anymore. 1 week after our confrontation, I called a family meeting. Emma looked nervous as she sat on the couch next to the kids. Olivia was fidgeting with her hair, a nervous habit she'd picked up in middle school, and Ben stared at the carpet, refusing to make eye contact. "I want to talk to you both about what's been going on," I began, looking at the kids. "You've probably noticed that things have been different lately." Olivia nodded slowly. Ben didn't react. "Your mom and I have decided to separate," I said, keeping my tone calm and measured. "It's not something we came to lightly, and I want you to know that this has nothing to do with you. You've done nothing wrong." "Why?" Olivia asked, her voice small. "Why are you separating?" I hesitated, glancing at Emma. She met my gaze briefly before looking away, her guilt written all over her face. "It's complicated," I said finally. "But the important thing is that your mom and I both love you very much, and will always be here for you. That's never going to change." Olivia's eyes welled up with tears, but she nodded. Ben, however, remained silent. "Do we have to move?" Olivia asked. "No," I said quickly. "You'll stay here, in your home, with me. Your mom will be staying somewhere else eventually, but she'll still visit and be a part of your lives." Emma flinched at my words but didn't argue. The conversation ended with hugs and reassurances, but the kids' sadness was palpable. I felt like a failure as a father, even though I knew I was doing the right thing. Over the next few weeks, the practicalities of separation took over. Emma moved out of the house and into a small apartment on the other side of town. The kids adjusted to a new schedule of alternating weekends with her, though it was clear they were struggling with the change. For me, life settled into a strange new rhythm. I focused on work, on being present for Olivia and Ben, and on rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The betrayal, the lies, the confrontation, it all felt like a wound that refused to heal. But slowly, I began to find pieces of myself again. I reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym more regularly, and even took up cooking, a skill I'd never had the patience for before. One afternoon, as I stood at the stove preparing dinner, Olivia came into the kitchen. "Smells good," she said, leaning against the counter. "Thanks," I said, smiling. "It's spaghetti. Nothing fancy." She watched me for a moment, then said, "Are you okay, Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Yeah," I said after a pause. "I'm okay." "Why?" "I don't know," she said, shrugging. "You just seem different." "Different how?" She thought for a moment. "Happier, I guess." "Happier." The word lingered in the air as I turned back to the stove. Maybe she was right. Emma and I finalized the divorce 6 months later. There were no dramatic courtroom battles, no bitter exchanges. Just signatures on a piece of paper and the quiet acknowledgement that we had reached the end of the road. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and, oddly enough, hope. My marriage was over, but my life wasn't. Emma sent me a text later that evening. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't reply. Some things didn't need to be said. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. And that was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with the quiet realization that life goes on. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it, one step at a time.